One of the more dreadful things I think that this government did was when it first came into power was the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, immediately rescinded an act. It was called, I think it was freedom of speech on campuses or something like that. She rescinded that act. She stopped it going through. So what this act was for was to enshrine freedom of speech, freedom of expression on university campuses. So in other words, views you might not like, you know, challenging views, as long as they're legal, they don't incite violence, they should be allowed. That's obviously right. Well, she got rid of that law, so she obviously doesn't like freedom of speech very much, particularly on university campuses. Going to speak now to a guy who perhaps experienced the ramifications of what Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, did. He's a regular on the show. It's good to have him. We'll go over to him in a minute. Jonathan Sakadote is a journalist. He went to Oxford University as a student. Anyway, he went back there recently to take part in a student union debate at the famous Oxford Union. He was opposing a motion that Israel is an apartheid state responsible for genocide. He opposed it. Being a Jewish person, of course, he would. Well, welcome to the show, Jonathan. Rather than me tell the story of what ensued at this stately home of British education, the greatest university allegedly in the world, certainly in this country, tell me how the free-thinking students of this establishment treated you when you opposed this motion.
The Oxford Union's invitation to that debate was a model of how not to do freedom of speech, how not to do fair debate. For starters, there was the motion, which was an outrageous one. They suggested that the state of Israel was an apartheid state responsible for genocide. Both of those allegations massively overblown, very aggressive, giving away, really, I think, the president's one-sidedness on this before it even started. He's an Egyptian Arab who's been voted in for that role, and he's made it his business to invite a series of anti-Israel speakers during his term of events. Now, I'm all for freedom of speech. It is his right to do so, but it says a lot about him that that was the focus of most of his events. And when it came to this debate, he invited me to speak, and a couple of speakers in our team did, in fact, pull out because he put together such an inflammatory team on the other side, quite well-known, infamous anti-Israel haters who are so extreme that some people didn't want to debate them. Thankfully, we managed to recruit two extra people who are outstanding on this topic. One of them, Mossab Hassan Youssef, and one of them, Yosef Haddad. These are two Arabs, as you might guess from their names. Yes. One is an Israeli Arab, and the other is a former Hamas founder's son, who then switched sides in order to provide information to the Israeli intelligence services to save hundreds or thousands of lives by foiling terror attacks, suicide bombings. Now, these two people are actually uniquely well-positioned to explain how this allegation of genocide is preposterous, because Yosef Haddad serves in the IDF, in the army, has equal rights in the country. In fact, it's a campaigner for Israel. And Mossab is, of course, somebody who's seen both sides of this from deep within, both in terms of Hamas and in terms of the intelligence service in Israel. So when we got there, we'd already had a really hard time with them trying to mistreat and cancel those two speakers. They didn't like that we had recruited those two people. But when we got there, it was just a whole different ballgame. The crowd was so aggressively hostile. The second we walked in, they were swearing, coughing, jeering, swearing at us in Arabic and in English. In fact, the two Arab speakers I mentioned to you, both of them said it reminded them of being in Ramallah or Gaza. So it just gives you an impression of how extreme it felt just being in there. And even before that, the president didn't allow us to do the traditional things that they do in the Oxford Union. We didn't have a joint dinner with the other speakers. There was no pre-debate photo. They wouldn't stand with us in a photo. They really did their best to try to ostracize us, make us feel like pariahs. And then when I gave my speech, boy, was I in for a shock, because it wasn't a room full of students who maybe had strong views but wanted to hear the other side. It was just yobs. It was an orgy of anti-Semitism. It was a circus of absolute hatred, narrow-mindedness and closed-mindedness. I was jeered at, screamed at, they shouted me down, they swore at me. And then when they eventually did publish the video, as they traditionally do on YouTube, they had censored all of this abuse. They just cut the mic so you couldn't hear just how badly I was being treated. And I, in the end, took it upon myself to dub on the sound. I'd done a little audio recording on my phone just so that I had it for reference.
Right.
And I put the two together and put it up. So I would say actually close to 1 million people have now watched that video, which just shows you, I think, the extreme interest in the Oxford Union, meant to be the last bastion of free speech, actually choosing to abuse guests it's invited and then to censor that abuse so that people couldn't see it online.
Well, the truth of the matter, Jonathan, and thanks to your good work, I would suggest, is the Oxford Union is now being investigated by the Counter-Terrorism Policing Unit for the South East. It's making inquiries into reports of, it says a person, I suspect it might be more than that, but a person expressing support for a prescribed organisation during this event. I would imagine that was Hamas or Hezbollah or something like that. You know.
Yeah, well, I can tell you what that was.
Yeah.
That was so at one point, one of the speakers on the other side, a guy called Miko Peled, said that he believed that the October the 7th attacks were not terrorism. He said they were heroic. And I did actually point out at the time, politely, to the President of the Union that, in my opinion, was illegal. It broke the rules of law in the UK. Under the Terrorism Act, you can't show support or encourage people to support a terrorist organisation like Hamas. Yeah. But of course, the President wasn't on our side. In fact, the President, who's meant to be chairing the debate, he's meant to be independent, he actually, halfway through the debate, stepped down from this throne they put him on at the top of the room, stepped down to make a speech against us. He replaced one of the speakers who'd pulled out at the last minute on their side because that speaker, Norman Finkelstein, was apparently afraid of debating Mossab Hassan Youssef. So all this high drama about this topic. But then when it came to it, the president wasn't fair. The president wasn't unbiased. He'd set up this horrible festival of hatred and anti-Semitism. And what became clear was that the room was really packed deliberately with really aggressive people who were there to scream and shout. They weren't there to hear the debate. It was a setup. It was like a sham trial. I'm all for freedom of speech and for us to have a debate. But as I pointed out to these students, after they dragged one who'd been screaming at me like a banshee, they dragged her out of the room because we insisted. It took them 2-3 minutes. She was screaming at me, genocidal mother effer.
Yeah, I've got. Yeah, so you just pointed out, I believe. I mean, first of all, these people, your opponents in this, for want of a better word, debate, they don't seem to realise that genocide is a legal definition and it has to be proved in a court of law. So all these people are going and saying, Israel is guilty of genocide. Well, actually, here's the fact. It is not, because it has not been proved, and I would suggest it will never be proved. So they're wrong on that basis. But you apparently pointed out that actually Israel has given 700 tons of food to Gaza, at which point they shouted at you. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. You know, F you, you genocidal mother effer. You know, I mean, were you? It sounds like quite a harrowing experience. Were you physically intimidated?
We had to have 8 bodyguards with us in order to be there. So just so that you have an idea, and that wasn't overkill. You know, this was an honest assessment of the security team, because in campuses things have got so violent, especially in the States, but also in the UK, that it was advised that we couldn't be in there otherwise. And the union wouldn't pay for most of that cost either. But that's fine. We were there. The point is, I wanted to go there. And as I said, I'm a proud Jew, but it's also got very little to do with me being Jewish per se. The argument, as you point out, is ridiculous that Israel is a genocidal state when it is, for example, providing more than the average number of calories needed per day for a man, according to the NHS, to every Gazan in Gaza during the war. Now, it's not to say that there isn't suffering in Gaza. I've never said that. And I've never said that there mightn't be people in Gaza who aren't getting enough food. But we all know that that's because Hamas is actually hijacking the food on the way in, taking it away from the Gazan civilians, and often selling it in order to keep funding their terrorist terrorist activities. So the fact is that actually, as I pointed out in the speech, and I hope people can find it online and watch it, because I did make an argument, I did make a case. Very few other people on the other side did. They just screamed and shouted. But the point is, genocide, apartheid, these are legal terms under international law, and Israel doesn't qualify. Genocide requires clear and deliberate intent. For example, the Nazis at the Wannsee conference, came up with a meeting, and they documented their plan for the final solution to what they called the Jewish question. There's no similar document for Israel in Gaza, because it's not true, because the Israelis are actually trying to get food to the Gazans. They've actually vaccinated something like 97% of Gazans against polio during the war. It's not something the Nazis did. If you look at the Rwandan genocide, there were 800,000 people killed in 100 days. The radio urged people, ordinary civilians, to go out and slaughter their neighbors with machetes. It's not what we're seeing in Israel and Gaza. And as I said to them, it's not a genocide just because you're losing an unnecessary war that you started. These people have absolutely no idea what a reasoned debate was. But regardless, we went there to explain to them. They had their minds too closed to listen. But hopefully that video, mine and all the others, will be seen the world over online, partly because of the controversy they've caused over this. And more people will hear the truth. And I will always go anywhere where people are slandering Israel or Jews or anyone, actually, because I'm here to stand up for the truth, to have a reasoned debate, reasoned discussion, not to be shouted down by barbarians like that. These people were like, they were to debate and free speech, basically terrorists. They were terrorists of free speech and debate.
Let me get you, just before you go, fascinating story, really harrowing for you, and a scandal, frankly. It's a shame on our university systems. It's a shame on what is supposed to be the greatest university in the world that you attended as a student. This, as I said at the outset, this is the sort of stuff is going to happen partly because Bridget Phillipson, the new Labour Education Secretary, almost as soon as she got her cabinet boots on and into her big office and into her big chauffeur-driven car, her first act was to abandon the almost enshrined Tory law to enshrine freedom of speech on campuses. She got rid of that. I mean, this is what's going to happen because of her decision. What on earth motivated her to say, oh, there's this act. It's nearly in law. There's this act. What it's going to do is enshrine freedom of speech and expression on university campuses. We don't want that. Let's get rid of it. What on earth was going through her mind, do you think?
Well, these people at the Oxford Union, I don't think cared about the law at all. I don't think they cared about freedom of speech at all. And it's worth saying that even despite all this, they still haven't published 2 of the speeches on their YouTube. They've published all but 2. One is the one where I pointed out that Miko Peled appeared to give support to the actions of Hamas. And the other one was on our side, Mossab Hassan Youssef, who gave this outstanding speech. And one of the interesting parts of that was where he asked the crowd to put up their hand if they would inform on the terrorists who carried out October the 7th. If they'd had prior knowledge, would they have told the authorities in order to save life, just as he had done in his brave actions? And you know what? A handful of those people put up their hands. And he said, well, you're all, in effect, then, terrorist supporters. Now, as I said, I am for freedom of speech, and I do want students on campus to be able to speak freely, but not in a way that's intimidating, not a mob rule, not a way that's set up so that Jews didn't feel they could attend that meeting, which was the case. Tons of Jewish students have got in touch with me. I'm getting emails, dozens of emails every single day from people who've seen how we were treated, from people who wanted to be there but said they were too afraid or too intimidated to be in the room. I'm getting all sorts of feedback from around the world. But I say to Ebrahim Osman Mowafi, the president of the Oxford Union who organised this Circus of Hatred, that it's time he published Mossab Hassan Youssef's speech. It's time he does it now. He needs to stop stalling. He needs to put it on the YouTube. He needs to let the world see that they shouted vile abuse at him in Arabic, that he tried to kick Mossab out of the chamber, having invited him there for giving a speech, that he tried to shut him down. He tried to cancel him. None of that was free speech. And Ebrahim Osman Moafi should publish that speech immediately, uncensored, with no muting, and let people see exactly what he presided over, because it was a shameful display of vitriol and attacks on Jews and Arabs who were standing up for the state of Israel.
Well, I think it's a perfectly valid request on your part. I should say that Miko Peled is not here to speak for himself, but you say that he is the one that mentioned.
There's
Hamas.
a recording of that. There's a recording of it online, because I put that recording up too, so you can hear what he did say.
Okay.
Whether or not it's illegal, that's for the police and the judiciary
Agreed.
to decide. But you know, I heard what he said. Everyone in that room heard what he said, and people who go onto YouTube and find the clip can hear what he said.
Well, perhaps we'll get you back on and play some of this stuff. I thought we'd just be a bit careful this time, Jonathan. But thank you for telling us your
Thanks, Kevin.
traumatic
Thank you.
story. Real pleasure to talk to you.